Welcome to Cheaper Than Therapy, a podcast that journeys into conversations that demystify, destigmatize, and desensitize what goes on both inside the therapy room and in daily life.
I'm Vanessa Bennett.
And I'm Danae Logan.
And we are seekers, soul sisters, and holders of sacred space. Every week, we sit down for soul-provoking conversations with fellow seekers, thought leaders, change makers, and even real people during live coaching sessions as they navigate the hard work it takes to be a human.
This is Cheaper Than Therapy.
We wanted to jump on today because Danae posted something recently, and we thought it was a really good conversation to have. And so we thought this would be a good topic for the pod, as well as to bring it to you all live to see if there were any questions that came up. And obviously also feel free to ask us questions as you're watching.
Yeah, I feel like I love that it's fun for me when I get pushback on something.
I love that you think it's fun.
People are like, oh no, I disagree. I'm like, oh good.
I am highly conflict avoidant, so I hate when people disagree with me. I just go into my shell as a turtle.
I love the activation points. I'm like, let's talk about it. Let's do some more exploration around.
That's why you're a good therapist.
You're a good therapist. You're a great therapist.
Thank you. I'm a coach, but
it's too big.
I know. Okay, so tell us what the post was and kind of what the activation was from somebody.
Yeah, so I feel like this is a conversation that comes up a lot around, I feel like Dr. Shefali, some of you guys know her work around conscious parenting. Her perspective on raising children really was a paradigm shift for me, which is basically that your children do not belong to you. You are your children are like these little gurus that come into your life to teach you lessons that you are meant to learn in this lifetime. But it's a real paradigm shift from the way that most of us were raised, which is that we sort of are our parents' belongings, that there's a sense of ownership over your kids. When your kids are doing something, it makes you feel embarrassed. Or if your kids aren't doing well, it's somehow a reflection of you as a parent. And I was saying, it's like that Khalil Gibran book, The Prophet. There's a poem in there where he talks about your children are not your children, right? And so whenever I'm talking about soul contracts, I bring up that poem and I talk about how I believe that we come through our parents into this life, but we do not belong to our parents. And I think a lot of times what I see happening for parents is that we get really tripped up in this sense of ownership. Mm-hmm. So if something's going wrong with my kid, or if my kid is struggling with something, I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I'm not a good parent. And I think that's a lot of pressure on your kids
and your kids. Yeah.
and I think that like our children are these individual little beings that are having their own life journey, their own experience. And there's something, I don't know, certainly a little narcissistic about sort of this sense of ownership that we have a lot of times over our children. But also I think we can really interfere with who our children are meant to become in this lifetime by projecting some of those fears, those worries, those paradigms onto them.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And also I feel like here's where I can see some of the, maybe the pushback or the activation coming around, right? So totally hear what you're saying around it being a little bit narcissistic to think that we own our children, right? And that somehow they are a reflection of us. I think there's two things that are coming up for me. So one is, and we talked about this, generationally, right? The generation prior to us, I would say like probably boomers, really, and before that, actually, I would say all the way up through boomers. The indication that you were a good parent was nothing other than your kids are obedient, right? Mm-hmm. So if you had obedient children, you were considered a good parent.
Yes.
That's it, right? And so I think that has actually trickled down. I don't think it stopped after the boomer generation. I think we still see it showing up now. I think it's still like a worry of ours. So there's that. And also, I think that in almost like, I don't know, people's like good intentions, I think is not knowing where the line is between I am here to guide my child and help my child as best as I can. And then where is that line where I say, here's my guidance, here's my help. Now the rest of it's on you. I think people struggle with that. And I do think there's good intention behind that struggle and just not knowing like, okay, but when do I back off? Like, what is the point that I say, this is your life, this is your journey, and it's not for me to control?
Yeah. I mean, two things come up. First, I think it's really important to unpack and really scrutinize what it means for a child to be obedient. Because as we know, so much of what we end up, doing a lot of healing work around is what it meant for us to be obedient. which is a lot of times stuffing difficult emotions, stuffing the things that were showing up for us as children that I would argue are actually really healthy manifestations of our humanity that felt overwhelming to our parents because they had been conditioned to suppress those things within themselves, right? So I think oftentimes what is an obedient child is a child who is
seen and not heard.
Exactly. Like those old school ideas of like, you know, what a child should be to be a quote good child, right? And I would argue like, I don't know, sometimes I think like when my child is pushing back or like really resisting something that I'm saying, I'm like, well done in your sense of individuation, well done in your sense of self that I don't want to take away from him.
I was just having this conversation actually when we all went to New York over the holiday. My little one, Logan, was like, she was struggling. I don't know what was going on. I think it was, travel, being tired, whatever it was. She had like 3 days where it was just like hell. It was like, I don't know where my child went. She was like acting totally different. And I remember going over to a girlfriend's house. We were all getting together. And I said, all of these qualities in her that I want her to continue to have, especially as a woman, as she becomes an adult, right? Like she's determined, she's outspoken, like she knows what she wants, like she's super firm in her boundaries, all these things. Like right now in this moment, like my girlfriend laughed. I was like saying this and she's like, "And I need you to comply right now in this moment." I'm like, "I just need you to get your fucking shoes on," right? Like, how do you balance? I mean, that's a good question because even I struggle with that. Like, what is the balance between like, and right now we need to get out the fucking door. You need to put your shoes on. And I understand that like you're asserting yourself and I respect that, and put your shoes on.
I mean, and that's the point, right? Because first of all, we all struggle with that.
Yeah. How can you not?
Yeah. And I think that so often what I find is that my work becomes my own self-regulation. My work becomes like paying attention to what it is activating in me when I'm like, okay, we're going to be late for school. I need your shoes on now.
Yeah.
And can I check that? Yeah, we might be 10 minutes late for school. The sky is not falling, but I find that more often than not, the bigger I am in my, like, you need to make this happen, it almost prolongs the process. Whereas if I'm like, all right,
like your activation activates him, which activates you, which activates him.
It's energy, right? Like he's responding to my energy of I'm going to control you and everything in him, because that's like the human response, even from really little. When someone is attempting to control us, our natural response is just to resist, right? So if I'm like, all right, bud, well, you let me know when you're ready to go. I'm going to...
Even you say that, I'm like, bullshit.
And I mean, and you know how many people are like, and these privileged, entitled children. And I'm like, you know what it is? It's this thing of like adult supremacy. I don't believe that I am superior to my child. And this is like, so many people really, really struggle with this, but I don't believe because I'm older than him, I am somehow superior as a person, or that like he has to comply with my will. Now, listen, when it comes to safety, if there's something that is like going to make him unsafe, of course, then you have to listen to me. But like putting your shoes on in a timely manner because I need you to do this now, or we're going to be late according to the time. Like, yeah, sometimes we're going to be late, but I find the more that I'm like forcing, the more that there's resistance. It's just, and the minute I'm sort of like, okay, I'm going to just chill and tend to myself with all of the stuff that is coming up as I'm watching the clock tick, he's just a lot quicker to get there.
I'm still struggling with this because I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody who says, okay, well, that's cool. I can try that with my kid, but they'll just never go to school. Like they'll literally never go to school. Like they'll never get out of the house. They'll never want to go to school. So are you telling me, right? Like as a parent, like we were saying, brushing your teeth as an example, right? I think this is a good example because as far as I know, everybody struggles with getting their kids to brush their teeth.
Why does it always come back to brushing?
Because it's like a universal struggle. Kids hate brushing their teeth, right? Like I don't know a single kid, what age, whatever, like until you hit late teens that you genuinely are like, oh, it actually feels nice to have a fresh smell. Like kids would go forever without brushing, right? Yeah. So when we were talking about this before we jumped on, it's like, okay, there's a certain age at which like you kind of, and I'm not saying I necessarily hold her down. I mean, maybe I did when she was like a little bit younger, but like there's a certain age by which you have to teach your kid, like, this is actually really important for these reasons, right? Like we do this for our body. We do this to take care of ourselves. Like actually having bad teeth can cause all kinds of other health problems that like will show up later in life. Like there are legitimate reasons for this, but they don't understand when they're 2, 3, 4 years old, right? And then you hit a certain age, like you were saying, a client has like a 13-year-old, and that feels different because then at 13, you're like, listen, I've done my part. I taught you what I can teach you. You know, you've been to the dentist now how many times every year. You know how important this is. If you choose not to take care of your teeth, like, then that's on you. That's, I think, where the struggle is. Maybe that's where that line is.
Yeah, I mean, your teeth belong to you, right? And then this is where something Brene Brown talks about, I have found super helpful, which is attempting to drop into empathy for what is happening to that child in this moment of like, I have like, I've told you, my son will even like use the actual words, you have no choice, you have no choice. And it frustrates him.
To himself.
Like he'll say it to me like in anger, like, you have no choice, mommy, I'm going to my room. Like, he's like mad that like an adult is again, sort of like in this point of supremacy over him or forcing him into something that he doesn't want to do or be. And so what Brene Brown suggests is giving them a choice. Right. So,
well, I mean, a lot of people that's like a lot of big parenting advice right now, right? It's all about like giving them choices so they feel like they have power.
So they have some sort of like autonomy, agency over their life experience, which might sound like, all right, but if you don't brush your teeth, then all of the popcorn is going to get stuck in your teeth. So we can either brush our teeth and we can have popcorn movie nights, which is like my kids' thing, or we cannot brush our teeth, but then we're not going to be able to have popcorn anymore, because when we don't brush our teeth and we have popcorn, that's going to hurt over time. Like really, like, oh, so what do you want to do? Do you want to brush your teeth and keep having popcorn, or not brush your teeth and not have popcorn anymore?
Yeah. I mean, she responsible with choices sometimes.
I mean,
sometimes the choice is you're either going to do this or I'm going to hold you down and you're going to do it. And then she chooses, let me just sit here and do it.
Well, and choice. I mean, she's a little younger too. I feel like it's a little hard to rationalize when they're still like,
she doesn't understand the concept. Yeah. Again, it's like, why am I doing this? Right. So I do want to bring this back to, because it's not just parenting that we see this show up. Let's be real. So I've got this all, we've got all these lives and we're recording all these things, specifically on TikTok, where I talk mostly about codependency. Yes. I think this is the conversation you and I have a lot. We work with a lot of our clients on, we bring this into all of our retreat work that we do. It's this idea of codependency versus interdependence, right? And how that shows up across the board in all of our relationships, right? And I know for me, as somebody who struggles with codependency, the desire to control everything, my people, my environment, right, stems from safety. It stems from a loss of control, a lack of control, which, by the way, going back to what you were just saying about kids, what better way than to train our children to be codependent and a need to control to feel safe than by taking away their control from day one. You're literally ingraining it in them as they get older, right? Like, my autonomy has been taken away. And so now I don't feel safe. I don't have agency over myself. So now what else can I go out and control over here? Right.
Oof.
I mean, shit, it shows up in everything.
And I think what you just said is so powerful, because I do feel like that is a way that I watch codependency show up for parents so often, is this like, other things in my life feel out of control. I'm going to control my kid. Like, it's like you're something that I can self-regulate through. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, I mean, and I feel like you feel it in your body as we talk about it, as it comes up, but that's what we're doing, and it's so, oof.
So explain that a little bit more. So this idea of self-regulating through your child.
Well, I believe that's what our codependency is in general, right? It's like, as you always say, right? I'm okay if you're okay. I'm good if we're good, right? Yeah. So I am self-regulating whatever is happening in my internal world, externally. Yeah. Right. So I feel like, I think a lot of times the way it'll show up is I have a conflict with my spouse. My spouse will not listen to me. I feel frustrated. I feel flooded. I feel overwhelmed. And why isn't my kid brushing their teeth? Right. Yeah. And that is someone that I can sort of get control of, regulate what is happening for me internally through them. Mm-hmm. And they have to comply because I'm the boss. I'm in charge. I'm the grown up.
So I don't feel like I have any control in other areas of my life. So rather than really sitting with that, digesting that, processing that, working through that on my own, figuring out, how to get around that, how to work through that, how to get control of my areas of my life, I just kind of put all of that over here. And instead of doing that, I just go to my kid and I say, I'm going to put all of that energy into controlling you.
Yeah. I mean, there was something that you said that I'm trying to circle back to. Like, we were talking about the thing of like the two reasons that's difficult for parents to hear.
Yeah.
And I think it is because a lot of times I remember you were talking about how it's like, I'm supposed to guide this child.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to make them a good person.
Well, I didn't say make them a good person.
Well, and I think
that's
I'm
what
sort
people
of
say.
Speaking
for like the average person.
I'm jumping into that, what my job is as a parent. I think our work is less to make a child anything. I think children are sort of innately who they are going to be, who they are meant to be. And this is the big paradigm shift from what we were raised in. I think that it's not our responsibility to sort of guide our children. It's our responsibility to get to know our children. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that they are who they came here to be. This is like the soul contract work, right? Like I came here with a mission. I believe my child came here with a mission. My job as a parent is to get to know him, to understand that mission to the best of my ability so I can love and support him through that, but not for me to decide who he's meant to be in this lifetime. And again, yes, I am here charged with keeping him safe, food, clothing, and shelter, but he is not mine to like mold into who I think he needs to be as a human being. That's not my job. That is control, and that is codependency.
Mm. So I'm struggling then with this idea of at least teaching is the word that keeps coming up for me, but I almost feel like teaching is still like a pointing down, I guess, word, but I don't know if it's guiding. I'm not really sure what the best word is. But then, so the question comes up for me around like, what about this idea of teaching your child? Like, even the word manners to me does feel like I'm instructing them to fit within society. And I get that, but like, I guess, how do I say this? So are you saying that you believe, let's just say we didn't teach our children anything about like being kind or taking turns or, not being rude in how they speak to somebody. Do you believe that they just innately know that stuff and it will just come out on their own if I never model that or teach that to them at all?
Listen, you just said an important word. You said model. I believe my child says thank you because he hears me say thank you to him or thank you to his father. Like there are certain things that he is watching and he's sort of emulating what I'm doing. And this is, again, a place where I get some pushback.
Say thank you.
You need to say thank you, or you need to like,
I hear that a lot too.
I don't love that. Like, if that's not the truth of how he feels, I don't want him to say.
Although I will say when she looks at me and goes, juice, and I'll go, I'm sorry, what? And she'll go, please. I'm like, yeah, okay.
You get to be an autonomous person. Yeah. Like, I don't want anybody making demands at me. I don't work for you. I think you can say those things to a child as another human being. Mm-hmm. But there's something about, I'll never forget, like when my little boy first went to school, they would say like, he's like the greeter. When there's a new kid who's crying, who's super upset, he goes over and he's like the welcome committee. And he like has like such deep empathy for that child. And he's like, it's fun. Here's what we do. And he shows them around. I didn't teach him that. Yeah. That's who he is, right? Like, I think that so much of our work is just
extrovert.
I know. I'm like, I did not teach him that. I'd be like, well, don't work it out. But I think that we're just not giving them enough credit a lot of times when we're like, I need to teach them to be a good person. Well, who told you they're not a good person? Like what? And I think that if we see them as good people and we're just sort of like really highlighting all of the ways that we see them as good people, and listen, do I do these things perfectly? Of course not. And there are some things that I just am like, this is innately who he is. Most of my work is to stay out of the way.
I can see how that would show up in like romantic relationships too, because when I think about as being a therapist, right? When a couple comes in, so say somebody comes in for couples therapy, when a couple comes in and there's contempt, right? Or there's like blatant disrespect. Like, I don't love who this person is as a person anymore, right? I'll tell you, like, behind the curtain, and it's not really behind the curtain because the Gottmans have talked about this a lot, but they're usually, as a therapist, in my gut, I'm like, oh, I don't see a lot of hope for this relationship. Like, if that contempt is already so boiled in where I truly don't believe my partner's a good person anymore, right? And I say anymore, hopefully you did at one point, otherwise you wouldn't be with them. But if you've gotten to a place where you have that much feeling of like, this person's, I don't respect them as a person, I sometimes as a therapist, I see very little hope to come back from that. It's hard to rebuild that respect for somebody when you like squashed it for so long. And I think that can be similar for a kid. It's like, how come you don't believe that your child is innately a good child or that you respect them, right? Because a lot of it's respect, especially with parents. It's like that you don't respect them having their own voice, having their own opinions, pushing back on you and having their own boundaries. It's like, yeah, it's respect.
Yeah. I mean, I'm circling back to what you were saying about couples, and, this is where I love couples work, but I think I a little bit get what's underneath that lack of respect.
Sure.
A lot of times I think that it has to do with something with my relationship with myself, right?
Well, it always comes back to relationship itself, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah. And I feel like I always use this Meryl Streep quote, but I'm coming back to it again, which is, she was talking about the longevity of her marriage. And someone was asking how they've made it last all these years. And she was saying, whenever I have been, unhappy in my marriage or dissatisfied with my husband or felt like I needed something more, it was always when I was feeling those things about myself. Right. So I think a lot of times when we're holding contempt for our partner, there's something that I'm not like, it's like distraction. Like there's something about myself that I don't want to focus on. There's something about like my mission and how I'm showing up in the world that I'm not feeling proud of. That it's like, how do I bring the focus back to me? Because when I'm focusing all of that energy externally, normally it's because there's some things about me I don't want to look at or address. And, we talk about all the time with couples therapy, like the couples that are like, this person is doing this, then it's like, okay, until you're willing to like bring the focus and look at yourself, like this is a waste of time for everybody, right? And so I don't know, like I do think there can be hope, but it's a lot of times like, obviously.
I just think it depends on like how many years of resentments and contempt have you built up? Because even if you do the work on yourself, what I have experienced is like and this is why when I teach about codependency, I talk about resentment being such an important marker, right? It's like, it's a flag that we have to pay attention to the absolute second it comes up, because if we don't, right, then it gets kind of added to the pile, and it becomes like this bank account that we're just like adding to. And if it gets to the point where you're talking years on the road, it's not that it's impossible, but it's a heavy bank account to drain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I understand, and I feel, we're talking about like overfunctioner, underfunctioner dynamics, and I think that I often relate more to the underfunctioner dynamic, and so, the attempt to change the person or the feeling of contempt is not so much like what in my body I resonate with, and I think that like on both sides, it's still like, how am I holding myself? What am I feeling about me? And that can be and to your point, I think if that person is just like really resistant to looking inward, then yeah, I think move on to the next person and see how much you're able to avoid those same things coming up. Because, wherever we go, we take ourselves with.
Yeah, I know the contempt thing is really interesting, because as the overfunctioner, obviously, so much of my work, I'm thinking about my last relationship and, or I guess 2 relationships ago. And so I had so much contempt, and, I was in a relationship with somebody who had, a substance issue, and I was starting to do my own work, and I was going to therapy, and I was in Al-Anon, and I was doing my codependency journey and recovery journey. And I was really working on that contempt. And I was working on turning it around back to myself. And yet there was so much contempt and so much, actually not even contempt. I actually believe, now that I'm saying that out loud, through the process of working on myself, what happened was the contempt went away. I actually no longer had contempt in the way that I did in the beginning. I still had a lot of resentment, but resentment and contempt to me feel slightly different. I had a lot of resentment in that as I was doing my work and I was being more clear about my expectations, my needs, my boundaries, and he was not doing any of his own work. So he was still meeting me in the same place he had always been meeting me. And I was doing all this work, and I felt like I was trying so hard to better myself in a relationship, and I was still kind of being met with this like wall. So the resentments were still there, but what happened was I no longer had contempt. It was more of like I don't hold contempt for you because I see that you don't have the capacity for this. Like, you can't meet me there because of where you're at. I don't find that contemptuous, what's the word I'm thinking of, anymore. I just see it for what it is, and I release both of us from that contempt. And now I say, I'm gonna stop hitting my head into this brick wall, and I'm gonna leave. Like, this is the end of the relationship.
Yeah, and I do think that is sometimes where relationships need to and do expire.
Yeah.
When it's like we can't meet in that space. I do feel curious to hear more about the wall as you say it. Like, what does that look like? How do you know that your partner is meeting you in a wall? Do you know what I mean?
Well, they were still fully in the throes of a substance addiction and absolutely incapable of saying that there was a substance addiction.
Well, so then there's no reciprocity because
There's no
you're not
reciprocity.
actually in a relationship with you, you're in a relationship with a substance, which is a very different conversation, right?
Yeah. And I think that happens so often. I think that, at least in my experience, like I have a lot of people who come to me, and we always say as therapists, like clients find you that like need to find you, right? I have a lot of people who will come to me who are either in a relationship with somebody with a substance, have previously gotten out of a relationship with somebody with a substance, right? So that tends to be my world, hence my kind of obsession with codependency and diving into it. And one of the things obviously we talk about is that like they can't meet you, they can't do this work with you until they're actually working on that substance, right? Because just like you're working on your addiction, which is your behavioral addiction, which is your codependency,
right?
They should also be working on their addiction, which in this case happens to show up as a substance addiction, right? And I think in my example anyway, there was zero acknowledgement or willingness to kind of own that part. And it was still a lot of finger pointing. And so where do you go from there, you know?
Well, I feel like, your previous relationship to me ends up being a really great example of what I tell clients all the time, which is like, do your work. Focus on you. That person will either rise to meet you where you're expanding or who you are becoming, or the relationship will fall away as it needs to. But you don't have to know. You don't have to figure out and like get in there and make it happen and make them comply.
Well, and even that, when you do that face and you're like, oh, I'm going to get in there, like that to me, I feel contempt in that. That like getting in there and wanting you to be the way I want you to be and like controlling, like there's an energy behind that feels contemptuous. I don't know. And maybe that is the over-functioning, controlling aspect of myself, but it's like, if I'm getting in there, I'm trying to control and you're not complying, I'm going to feel contempt for that.
Yeah.
I'm doing that to myself.
And that's
going back to the kid thing.
That's such a powerful point, right? Because anytime I need you to be anything other than who you are in this moment, like that's about me. Right.
Yeah,
like
it is.
Our relationships. And again, this is another really large paradigm shift, but to me, this is the interdependence piece. Is my job is not actually for me to make you anything other than you are. You get to be your own autonomous human being. My job is to love you exactly as you are, period, end of sentence.
By the way, loving you, we're not talking about kids, we're talking about romantic relationships. Loving you exactly as you are doesn't mean that I'm staying.
Yeah, loving you does not have anything to do with my love for me. Like I love myself first, period.
That's what I think we have to be very clear about. It's like this idea does not mean I just stay and accept bad behavior, right?
Right, and that's an important distinction, but that's when we always talk about like, is my love coming from a space of fear or genuine love, right? Like if I'm people pleasing or if I'm in a codependent dynamic or I'm like allowing you to, I don't know, be disrespectful of me and whatever, then fear is what is driving that quote love. That's actually not really love. That's not saying the thing. That's not being authentic in this relationship. I don't need you to change. You get to be who you're going to be. I'm not a victim of who you are. I just get to decide if I want to stay and participate in this dynamic with the way that you are showing up.
Girl, I talk about this all the time and people have such a hard time.
I know, we're a very codependent culture.
Yes, we are. I get so much pushback on this. And and I have said to numerous people, like, especially on TikTok, which I find it's really interesting because with the Instagram followers, right? Like people come to you specifically, like they follow you through somebody they know, or they resonate with your content. And so what I find in TikTok is because we're getting served up so many random people, there's so many people that get served up my content that are like, what is this bullshit? How dare you tell me that I'm the victim, that I'm keeping myself in a victim mentality because this person's, treating me like shit. And I'm like, well, are you accepting it? Are you tolerating it?
Methinks thou dost protest too much.
Like, are you not setting boundaries? Like what, so then, you are keeping yourself in that place. And holy shit, the amount of people who lose their minds on TikTok about like self-development stuff that comes across their page is just like, it's such an indication of how hard it is for us as a culture, us as a people to look inward, to own our 100%, to turn around and say like, what can I own in this? And I get it. I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, I have a hard time doing it every day. And like, hello, that's the work.
I mean, it's, to me, it's moving from problem to solution. I don't love swimming in problems. It's not my favorite thing. I do think a lot of people love to swim in the problems of life.
It's an addiction of it in itself, right?
It is. Yeah. And I'm like, if I either like, it's that Maya Angelou quote, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude about it. And I think like for the rest of my life, forever and ever, amen, the only person I get to be in control of is me.
It's me. Mm-hmm.
And so if I am in the state of being victimized, and you're right, like personal responsibility is not a popular concept in our culture. We want to point the finger at why everybody's a narcissist or a love bomber or a
gaslighter,
all the things, right? And it's like, okay, you're right. Sweet.
Okay, let's just say that. Let's just say, for example, that they are gaslighting the shit out of you.
Sure.
Do you
now
continue
what?
to show up?
Yeah. Now what are you going to do about it? Right? That person is who they are. You sitting in the space of, I am being victimized by this person, isn't actually hurting that person. Unpopular opinion. That's about you and your life. So if they are who they are, how do you allow them to be who they are and decide, I'm a victim of nothing?
Yeah.
I get to have agency over my own life. Period.
Yeah. And obviously, look, whenever we're having these conversations, there's always going to be the extreme. And this is another thing where people get like totally, like they lose their shit about it. It's like, how dare you say that if this person's in an abusive relationship and it's about their safety? And like, yes, there's always going to be that example where it's like, no, you can't just like pack your bags and walk out the door if you're in an abusive situation, you've got kids, you have no autonomy over your finances, like, and there's still ways that then let's get you some support.
Yeah.
Let's build from the ground up, right? Like, let's figure out how we can make a safety plan, figure out that financial stuff. Like, what do we need to do to get in there? And this, I say we, because in a lot of those cases, you do need somebody like a therapist or somebody external to help you in that, right? So I want to put words to that because we're not saying that like everybody, it's like, get in there and change it. It's like, sometimes it's not that easy, obviously. And we're not
saying any of this is easy. Personal responsibility is actually
the least easy thing.
Difficult work. And I still stand by what I said, which is bringing the focus back inward, right? If I am attracted to this person, or if I am in a dynamic that feels impossible for me to shift, I have to bring the focus back to me. And like you said, reaching out for help, seeing how I can get support, seeing what I can do to reclaim some sort of agency over my life. I don't care. I think that is still like what we have the ability to do. We're not
really think we have the ability to do sometimes.
We don't have the ability to change people.
Yeah.
Period. I don't care what they're doing. People change because they want to. Always, not because someone else has demanded or nagged them into submission. It's just not how we work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and again, here we are, we're back to kids. It's the same thing with kids. Like, and we had this comment, or you made this comment earlier where you were saying, I don't remember, I want to give the exact specifics. I don't want to give away this certain person, but it felt like to their kid, very fear-based, right? And I guess probably because how I was raised, I was very quick to be like, oh, well, I do it because I'm scared, right? Like I do it because I'm afraid of you, the parent, what the response is going to be, what the reaction, what the punishment is going to be. And I follow a lot of parenting people on like TikTok and Instagram and whatever. And so many times when they're giving this exact same feedback, which is like, parenting through fear, right? Versus parenting through autonomy and choice and things like this. And so many people are like, oh yeah, you're raising a bunch of snowflakes. You're raising a bunch of this, so many times. The term snowflake cracks me up, but it's like, yeah. And I've been on the receiving end of that kind of parenting, and you're not doing it because you believe it's the right thing to do. You're doing it because you're worried or you're fearful. And guess what happens? The second that person becomes an adult, which they will at some point, your 2-year-old's not going to be 2 forever. They're going to get to decide if they want to do that thing because you're not there to hover over them and instill fear anymore.
And they will lie to you.
Oh God, they will lie to you the absolute second they're able to lie, which is like 4 or 5 years old, by the way. That's when we learn to lie.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, how do I tend to the fear that is coming up for me? A lot of times when I am in that space of, I need my child to be compliant, I need my child to be a certain thing in society, for me, it is based on what I'm afraid of. A lot of times I hear parents speak to like, I'm afraid that if they're not doing well, or if they're acting out, that means something about me as a parent, or that means that I'm failing. Right.
Yeah. And I definitely experienced that feeling.
Yeah. I don't have.
I do.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe because like something about Dr. Shefali's work like really resonated with me before I had a child. And it's so much of the lens with which and this is the other thing, I think all of us sort of parent in response to the way that we were parented. And I felt very much like I was an extension of someone else and was very rebellious against that for so much of my life, that I think I am so like, he's not mine, he gets to be his own person. It's like, whatever he wants to do is fine.
He's over there being a little asshole. You're like, he's not mine.
I don't know, look at that kid. It's
whose kid is that? He's not
who raised him. Yeah.
I mean, you know, these are these concepts. We always come back to this idea that like it's always easier to hear it than it is to actually do it, right? And we're never going to do it right. I mean, Logan is still in a phase where she's getting a little better now, but she's still in that phase where she's very like physically aggressive. Like she pushes and she's very vocal. It's mine, and like it's so fascinating. Oh my God, it's so fascinating to watch because I'm like, you're like the smallest one, and yet you are the loudest and the most physically aggressive.
That's why I love it, because she's so little. It's
oh my God, and it's like it is hard for me because, you know, we'll go to like she has like this little gym class we go to, or like the playground, and I've seen her like straight up smack a kid in the face.
It's not funny.
And it's not funny because it's like, I don't want that to be my child. First of all, yes, I do feel that immediate shame where it's like, oh my God, I look around, like, is everybody looking at me? Like I have this horrible kid that doesn't have, you know, any, I don't know, respect or boundaries or whatever the words are that are coming up. So I do immediately feel that shame. And then I have to like in the moment, well, usually not in the moment. In the moment, I did actually, the one time she did do this, I did grab her hand because I was like, oh, like I couldn't believe she smacked this kid right in the face and did say no very like aggressively. And then I remembered, it was like a split second, holy shit, that was my reaction. And then I remembered and I was able to like quickly self-soothe enough to let go of her hand, divert my attention to that little kid, which is what I've like read numerous times. It's like, nope, you actually ignore them and you go to that child and you show that child empathy, right? Like, are you okay? Did that hurt? Right? Yeah. Like, and then she gets to see that, which goes back to modeling. She actually gets to see me being concerned about this little person that she might have potentially hurt. Anyway, I just like recaptured all of this horrible experience of her smacking this kid on the playground. It was really triggering for me.
Well, and this is a good point because I think so often you forget that these are developmental stages, right?
Very normal.
I think that's really important for us as parents to tune into as well, because there's like, I remember buying the book of like why we don't hit, and they grow out of it.
They
like,
do.
Doesn't hit anybody anymore. But there was a stage where it's like, I am like figuring out how
my body too, right? My space in the world, like that kind of stuff.
And regulate through my frustration. And like, this is like, and they start to understand, but I think that is, smart advice to like bring it to empathy for the other child. But that it doesn't mean she's going to be like a violent little girl. It means that developmentally, this is what they do at this stage, right?
Oh God, it's so hard though. I mean, I you know, it's hard because you do want to control. You do want to say in that moment, like, we don't do that. We don't hit, you know, and that's not, I don't know, that's not helpful.
Well, and they don't stop.
They don't stop.
Like I think
when you say helpful, when I say helpful, that I think that's what it is. They don't stop that experience unless I scare the shit out of her so badly. Not that I would, but I'm saying like,
how would you do that? Exactly?
Well, I've seen parents, right? It's like where I've actually seen this happen. You know, I've engaged with parents where their parent does do like a pushing or hitting. And I, as a grown woman, get uncomfortable with how aggressive that parent shows up to their kid. And how they parent that kid in such an aggressive way that I actually, in my body, feel unsafe. Yeah, okay, your kid probably will stop hitting, but only because they are absolutely terrified of you.
And
they haven't learned why they shouldn't hit. They've just learned, oh my God, I'm terrified of my parent.
And my emotions are too big and I need to start like shrinking and suppressing myself. And that is where I think like the long lasting damaging impact comes in, is when I am so out of control. I am so out of the space of self-regulation that I let my fear get so big that it terrifies that child, and that child will do anything to defend against having that experience again.
To never have to feel that.
Yeah, that's important. And you're right. I have seen that like with parents and been like, what do we do? That was,
Oh, that's so hard. It's hard. I like feel it in my body as I'm talking about it, like experiencing that and being like, I like just want to hug their kid. Like my only thing in that moment is I actually want to like take that kid out of their arms and like give them a hug because it just feels so visceral to experience that.
Yeah. And that's the difference between guilt and shame, right? Yeah. Like what you're teaching Logan in the moment that you go and empathize with the other child is to feel maybe a little guilty because she smacked a child upside the head and
in the face. So, square in between the eyes.
So I would argue that guilt is maybe an appropriate emotion for her to feel, but the differentiation between guilt and shame, for those of you who don't know, is guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad, right? And so what we don't want our children to internalize is this sense of, when the parent's emotion explosion is so big, it's like, oh, what I did must have been awful. I must be bad because
they reacted like this.
Had such a large reaction, right? So it becomes, that's actually like a brilliant way to that's that you just hurt someone. This child is hurting. We don't want that. You should feel some kind of way about that, but you're not bad.
Brene Brown says, though, which I think is really interesting, because obviously we know that she's done, almost her whole career has been around shame. She actually talks about how there is a certain amount of developmentally appropriate shame, right? Like she talks about how there is a certain amount of shame that's actually important for development within a society. Like essentially it's like how we learn how to function in a society is through the shame. But the difference is that it shouldn't come from those who are supposed to love you unconditionally.
Yeah. And
it's going to come from peers sometimes. Yeah. It's going to come from, unfortunately, like maybe a coach or a teacher or whatever, like basically not your people, your family, your closest people. And that's when the shame can be so much more like toxic and detrimental, is when it comes from those people.
Yeah. And I think that you're right. Like so many of these things are things that are unavoidable. And, this is where I don't follow parenting experts, because I do feel like there can be just so much of this, we feel like crippled as parents. Like, what am I supposed to do? What's the script? I don't want to get it wrong. And I hear that so much from parents, and I'm like, I don't know, you're going to screw up your kid. Get over it and just do the
I say it all the time. John gets so mad at me when I tell parents this. I'm always like, you're going to fuck up your kid. Can we just get that out of the way now?
It's called human beings raise human beings. But I will say, Catherine Winter-Celery, little shout out. She is like my favorite parenting expert. She is someone I follow because she talks about this thing of teaching or treating your child like you would another human being. And to me, that's the best I can do. I'm not going to do it perfectly. He's not going to be unscathed as he moves through this world, but can I treat him with the amount of respect that I would want? And when I fall short, say, yep, Mom missed the part. Sorry about that, but I think that's really the best we can do.
And I think that brings up a lot of shame in people too. Coming back to self-acceptance, what's my 100% in this? Being able to actually say, I shouldn't have spoken to you like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't okay. I got frustrated because of whatever reason. And I should not have spoken to you like that. And I'm sorry, I own that. And, even at 2, I'm trying to do that with Logan. And I will say it's not easy. For me, it's not easy, but I am the one on the other side where I do have a lot of shame. And that is a lot of my codependent tendencies, accepting what I've done that's quote unquote bad, and being able to separate, I have done this thing that's bad, separate that from I am bad. Is something that I really struggle with. And so even with my kid, even with my partner, I struggle with that, and I say that out loud because I want to acknowledge everybody's saying own it and apologize to your kid and whatever. And it's hard.
Yeah. And I think it's important that you said that and you made that distinction, because I think, it does require a lot of ego strength to do exactly what you're saying, which is understanding no part of me is ever minimized by being human and allowing for my humanity. And most of us weren't raised to believe that. Most of us were raised to believe that you're just supposed to avoid making mistakes at all costs. And some of this is our natural response to defend ourselves, right, and protect ourselves when we feel we've fallen short. I love to apologize. Sometimes too much. People are stop saying I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I have a hard time saying I'm sorry ever about anything, ever. It's not a good. It's not cute. It's not a good look.
I feel like you apologize.
I've gotten better. As I've done this work, I've gotten better, but it's not my natural inclination. My natural inclination is well, fuck you to the other person. I'm not going to say I'm sorry. Clearly this is about you and not me. Right. And it's taken a lot of, that's also kind of how I was raised. When we're raised by parents who also have a hard time taking ownership because they deal with their own shame and their own, then we learn that too, right? Modeling. So it's definitely been something I've worked hard at.
Glennon Doyle talks about how person, like before it even comes out of her mouth, he'll be like, I know, Mom, you're sorry, I'm fine, you're doing a great job parenting me. I'm like, that's so gonna be me.
I know, and he's like a preteen, right? So I can only imagine the eye rolling that comes
Oh my
with
gosh.
having a parent like
but
that.
Again, it's like response to how, because I never heard. And
No,
children
never.
have this incredible sense of justice, right? And there were times I was like, you owe me. Apology, damn it.
Times there was many times.
But I think they say that like we are so resilient, our children are so resilient. But there is something so healing, even years later. And I think this is important for parents to understand too. You can always circle back. You can always, and this is when your kids are a little older, maybe not with Logan, too, but you can always say, ooh, yesterday, that thing I did with the teeth, like, girl, not mommy's finest moment. Sorry about that.
I say this about relationships all the time. Like the number of people that I work with or that I coach or that I teach where I'm like, there is no timeline.
Yeah.
I say this all the time. There is no timeline. Like if you did something that hurt somebody's feelings, or by the way, if your feelings were hurt, there is no timeline that you don't get to go to that person and say, hey, you know that thing that happened last week, the conversation we had about X, Y, and Z, it really upset me when you said X, and it really bothered me when you said C, and I think so many of us feel like if we don't say it right away.
I wish I would have said.
Yeah, so say it, right? And I mean, look, I've lost friendships for that. Like you should have said it in the moment. And the fact that you didn't say it makes me feel unsafe in this relationship.
I'm like, ooh.
That's exactly what I got told because I waited 1 week to tell somebody.
Perfect.
Well, that's a very, very much an indication of self, right? Of that person's self. But yeah, I got told because I waited a week and I was walking around thinking and holding on to this thing that they felt unsafe in the relationship with me. And essentially like the friendship ended over it. And in the beginning, it really hurt. It really did make me think like, oh my God, I should have said it. And it made me like turn it inward. And now after like really sitting with it, it's just, again, it's such an indication of that person's ability and capacity to sit with, I hurt somebody's feelings and I should own my fucking shit.
And that has nothing to do with who I am as a person.
No.
That doesn't make me a bad person because we will all fall short. We will be human.
Yeah. And it doesn't make me on the other side of that person. It doesn't make me like the fact that I struggled with going to this person and saying it. I had to work through the fact that like, no, I was totally justified in saying it when I said it. And their capacity or incapacity to hold it is not a reflection of I did something wrong by waiting a week.
Yeah. I mean, I think we say this about boundaries a lot. This is this person attempting to be close to you, trying to increase the amount of intimacy. That is what I hear in that statement with that friend you're talking about is a bid for more intimacy, right? Like, I don't want this to be something between us. It sat with me and I'm attempting to bring you back to me. I'm attempting to increase our intimacy. Yeah. I mean,
I tried, but also, and I can see how that, that plays into, I mean, look, it's the stories that we tell ourselves. It's like, if that's how we were raised, if those bids for intimacy were treated in that same way, and then the people who are close to us that we have, by the way, drawn into our lives for a reason, respond with the same response, right, to our bids for intimacy, we are going to internalize that and say, this is why I shouldn't say anything. This is why I shouldn't speak up. This is why I shouldn't communicate a hurt or express a boundary, because this is what happens, right? And I've done enough work, at least at that point, I had done enough work to say, no, this actually isn't about me. I know the kind of relationships I want in my life. I'm going to continue those bids for intimacy, and the people in my life are either going to accept them and come closer or not. And the ones that don't are not meant to be in my life anymore, because that's just not the kind of relationships I want in my life. And I don't know. I mean, this all goes back to control, I guess, in some ways. It's like, I can't control that other person. And by the way, me having something that hurt my feelings and not saying it because I don't want to rock the boat, because I don't want that person to leave or to blow up or to respond in the way I know they're going to respond. Yeah, that's control.
Absolutely.
That is control.
Manipulation.
And people have another really hard time. That's another one that they have a hard time with, is like, that is a form of manipulation. You are controlling and manipulating that relationship. You are showing up in a specific curated way in order to control the dynamic of that relationship. And by the way, you do not benefit from that kind of control.
Yeah. I think, and I say often to clients, to me, one of the largest indications of our healing is our ability to sit in the discomfort of people not liking us, people not being pleased with us, or people carrying like the wrong idea about us. And that does not diminish my sense of self. Yeah. It's like deep work. And to me, like when I'm able to say like, yeah, their perception of me, the way that they are going to experience me is not the truth of how I feel about myself. And I've got to let them have that. I don't need to fix it. I don't need to do anything to change that. Like that's just how they're going to have to feel. And it actually doesn't have anything to do.
Yeah, it's like depersonalizing, right? It's our work of depersonalizing, which I think is also so much of our just expansion of self is like our constant ability to depersonalize. That is lost, but I mean, you know,
it's just more of your time for me.
I was gonna say it's
now you just have more time to be with me
and put bids for intimacy out into the universe. I love you.
I love you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Cheaper Than Therapy.
Be sure to share it with a friend, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
And if you want to connect with us more, find us on Instagram at Cheaper Than Therapy, the podcast.